Society tells a very specific story about men who reach 60 alone. And the story is not kind. The assumption is that something went wrong, that a man who arrives at that age without a partner failed somewhere along the way, that the absence of a relationship at 60 is evidence of a life that didn't work out the way it was supposed to, that behind the independence is a sadness that the man himself may not even be willing to admit. That is the narrative, and it is almost entirely wrong, because here is what that narrative leaves out completely. For a significant number of men, reaching 60 as a single man is not the result of failure. It is not a wound wearing a calm face. It is not loneliness pretending to be contentment. It is freedom. Real, earned, hard-won freedom of a kind that younger men rarely have the context to understand. A level of autonomy that only becomes available after decades of building, carrying, and fulfilling the obligations that define the earlier chapters of a man's life. And once that freedom arrives, once a man begins to actually inhabit it rather than apologize for it, the advantages become visible in ways that are difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced them. This is that explanation. Start with what experience actually does to a man over time, because this is the foundation of everything else. When you are young, life operates largely on illusions. Illusions about what will make you happy. Illusions about what other people's approval is worth. Illusions about which things actually matter versus which things merely feel urgent in a particular moment. Illusions about relationships, about status, about the specific shape your life needs to take in order to be considered successful. Those illusions are not stupid. They are part of how growth works. You have to believe certain things in order to pursue them hard enough to learn what they actually are. But by 60, a man who has been paying attention has seen through most of them. He has pursued things he was certain would satisfy him and discovered they were hollow. He has sacrificed for outcomes that turned out not to matter. He has watched other men chase the same things he once chased, and he has seen where those roads actually go. And what that accumulated clarity produces is something that cannot be purchased or rushed. He understands people, not in a cynical way, but in an accurate way. He can read a situation, recognize a pattern, assess a dynamic in a fraction of the time it would have taken him at 30. Because he has seen that situation before, he has lived inside that pattern. He carries decades of compressed data that younger men simply haven't had time to accumulate. And crucially, he understands himself. He knows what he actually wants, as opposed to what he has been told he should want. He knows what genuinely gives him energy and what drains it. He knows where his real values are, stripped of the performance and the social positioning that used to obscure them. That clarity is not a small thing. It is one of the most significant advantages a human being can possess, and it is one that a single man at 60 can apply without compromise, without negotiation, without filtering it through another person's preferences and priorities. He simply knows, and he can act on what he knows. Now let's talk about time, because this is where the advantages become most concrete and most immediate. Time is the resource that younger men are constantly told to value, but rarely actually treat as valuable. They trade it cheaply. For careers that don't fulfill them, for social obligations that drain them, for the maintenance of relationships that have stopped generating anything worth the cost. By 60, a man who is single has something that is genuinely rare: complete ownership of his time. Not in theory, not with asterisks, not subject to negotiation or revision based on someone else's schedule or needs or emotional state. His time is his. He wakes when his body tells him to wake. He structures his mornings around what actually prepares him for the day rather than around the logistics of shared living. He travels when the opportunity interests him, without coordinating, without compromise, without the complex calculus of two people's schedules trying to align. He can spend an entire Saturday reading without guilt. He can reorganize his entire routine when a better routine becomes clear. He can follow an interest wherever it leads, for as long as it holds his attention, without any external pressure to redirect that attention towards someone else's needs. After decades of responsibility, after years of careers and obligations, and the constant background noise of other people's requirements, that level of autonomy is not a small thing. It feels, to men who have earned it, like oxygen. And it produces something that is more than just comfort. It produces the conditions in which a man can finally figure out what he actually wants to do with the time he has left. Not what he is supposed to want. Not what looks right from the outside. What he, specifically, in this specific chapter of his life, genuinely wants to pursue. That question becomes available when time is yours. And for a single man over 60, it is. Something else happens at this stage of life that people underestimate, and it is worth slowing down on. Emotional stability. By 60, a man who has been living seriously has been through enough to develop a particular quality of resilience that is almost impossible to build any other way. He has experienced real success and discovered what it actually feels like. He has experienced real disappointment and discovered that he survived it. He has watched situations that felt catastrophic reveal themselves, in time, as temporary. He has learned, through direct experience rather than abstract understanding, that most of what triggers panic in younger men is manageable, that most of what feels permanent is not. That knowledge creates a different relationship with the present moment. He doesn't panic over small problems, not because he is numb or detached, but because his internal reference library is large enough that he can accurately assess what a problem actually is and what it merely feels like in an anxious moment. He doesn't react impulsively. He observes first. He thinks before he responds. He has learned, at real cost in earlier years, what impulsive reactions produce, and he applies that knowledge automatically. He doesn't catastrophize, because he has lived through enough actual difficulty to understand the difference between a difficult situation and a catastrophic one. For a single man, this stability is amplified, because there is no relationship dynamic introducing external volatility into his emotional environment. No conflict to manage, no tension to navigate, no other person's anxiety bleeding into his own. Just his own inner state, which by 60 he knows how to maintain with a degree of skill that is genuinely rare. That calm is not isolation. It is the product of decades of living, distilled into a quality of presence that younger men can observe, but not yet replicate. Connected to the emotional dimension, but worth addressing separately, is something that happens around social expectation at this stage of life. By 60, for many men, the weight of what other people think begins to lift in a way that simply wasn't available earlier. In younger years, social opinion carries real consequences. Your reputation affects your career. Your social standing affects your opportunities. The way you are perceived by the people around you has downstream effects on your actual life circumstances, which means caring about it, even when it is uncomfortable, is not vanity. It is strategic. But as a man moves through his 60s, that calculus shifts. He has already built what he has built. His professional reputation is established. His social circle is defined by genuine connection rather than strategic networking. The opinion of people who don't know him carries essentially no weight, and what that produces, quietly and without announcement, is a profound permission to be exactly who he actually is. Not the version of himself that was useful to maintain for professional reasons. Not the version that was adapted to make particular social situations easier. Not the version that was constructed partly to manage other people's expectations, just himself. With full access to his own perspective, his own preferences, his own genuine responses to the world. For a single man, this authenticity is available without compromise. There is no partner whose comfort requires certain performances to be maintained. There is no shared social identity that constrains individual expression. He can simply be what he is. And at 60, after decades of managing the gap between who you are and who various contexts required you to be, that simplicity is extraordinary. There is an intellectual dimension to this that deserves attention, because it is one of the advantages that single men over 60 often find most surprising and most satisfying. Without the constant demands of a relationship, without the logistical complexity of shared living, without the ongoing emotional labor that partnership requires, mental space opens up. Real space. Not the vague idea of it, but actual hours of uninterrupted thought. Time to read seriously. Not the occasional article or the book started and abandoned, but real sustained engagement with ideas. The kind of reading that changes how you think. The kind that requires enough consecutive quiet time to actually absorb something complex. Time to learn. Men in their 60s who are single often develop new areas of competence in ways that genuinely surprise them. Languages, history, philosophy. Skills they deferred during the busy decades. Areas of interest that were always present, but never had room to develop. Time to mentor. The perspective that comes with 60 years of experience is genuinely valuable to younger people navigating the same landscape. And the single man, who has time and stability and the desire to contribute, can do this in ways that are deeply satisfying, without the competing demands that would limit it otherwise. Time to create. Whatever form that takes for a particular man. Writing, building, crafting, designing, making things that didn't exist before. The creative impulse in men at this stage is often stronger than it has ever been, and it needs only time and space to express itself. All of these become available when life is not consumed by the management of a shared existence. And for many men, accessing them for the first time feels like discovering a version of themselves that was always there, but had been waiting for exactly this kind of quiet. Let's name something that often goes unspoken in conversations about older men choosing independence. There is a particular kind of authority that develops in a man who is completely comfortable in his own company. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply exists as a quality of presence that other people respond to without always being able to explain why. A man in his 60s who is genuinely at ease with himself, who doesn't need attention to feel okay, who doesn't reach for approval, who occupies his own life fully without apology or explanation. That man carries something that is immediately recognizable to people who encounter it. Younger men sense it and find it worth studying, not because he is performing anything, but because he represents something they are still working toward. A version of settled certainty that comes from a long life well navigated. It is not arrogance. It is not coldness. It is not the false confidence of a man who has never been genuinely tested. It is the quiet authority of a man who knows what he is, knows what he is not, and has stopped needing the world to confirm either. And that quality, in a man over 60 who has chosen independence, becomes one of the most genuinely compelling things about him. Here is the distinction that matters most in everything we have discussed, because it separates what we are talking about from what people often assume we are talking about. Solitude is not isolation. Isolation is the experience of disconnection from others. It is involuntary, or at least unwanted. It carries loneliness as its defining quality. A man in isolation is in a state of deprivation. Solitude is something else entirely. Solitude is the experience of being completely present with yourself. It is the condition in which a man's inner life has room to exist and develop and deepen without constant external interruption. It is chosen, or at least accepted, with genuine equanimity. And it carries not loneliness, but a kind of settled fullness. A man who practices genuine solitude does not reject connection. He often has deep friendships. He's capable of genuine intimacy. He brings real presence to relationships when he chooses to engage in them. But his well-being does not depend on those relationships in the way that men who have never developed internal resources depend on them. He can be alone and be genuinely fine. Not performing fineness. Not suppressing difficulty behind a productive surface. Actually fine, in the deep sense of a man whose inner world is rich enough that external company, while often welcome, is not a requirement for wholeness. That is the distinction, and it is the difference between independence as strength and aloneness as wound. The man we have been describing throughout this conversation has the former. And by 60, if he has been doing the work, he knows the difference himself. Let's bring this to where it actually lands. The greatest advantage of being a single man over 60 is not any individual item on the list we have covered. Not the time, not the financial clarity, not the emotional stability, not the freedom from social performance. It is the sum of all of it, arriving together at a stage of life when a man finally has the perspective to appreciate what he actually has. Self-ownership, complete, uncompromised, full-spectrum self-ownership. No negotiations about direction. No compromises about how the days are structured. No ongoing management of the gap between who you are and who the relationship requires you to be. No identity that is partly shared and therefore partly subject to someone else's preferences. Just a man with everything he has learned and built and survived, living fully in his own life according to his own actual values. Society will continue to frame that as a sad outcome, as evidence of something missing. But the men who are living it know something different. They know that this kind of freedom is not what you arrive at when things go wrong. It is what you arrive at when, after decades of navigating everything life required of you, you finally have room to discover what it looks like when your life is entirely, unapologetically, completely your own. And that, at 60, is not a consolation prize. It is the point.